Hello. Yeah, it was a pretty short essay. Um, Sorry I didn't see you guys yesterday. I really wasn't feeling it. And this week I don't have a single day off. Like I picked up extra stuff at work, so um, I worked like cumulatively like an extra 10 hours this week, and I just wasn't. Today is technically my latest work day. I was like, I'll stick it in today. Okay. So contentious topic, eh? Uh, so before we get going, I think there's kind of like two. I'm gonna like explain my understanding of a couple of things from the essay before we like get into the actual nitty gritty of it. The first thing I want to say is I think there's kind of two discussions going on in this essay. The first essay is like the question of feminists and heterosexuality or heterosexualism, which she told us at the end, which I knew is like the last essay of this book. Literally, is like, how can you be a feminist while being straight, or like, do you have to be a lesbian to be a feminist? Like this kind of question, which is, to be honest, I'm so excited for that essay because it's like a question that comes up a lot, like, and I like her tone when she talks about things. She's not like she described herself as angry. I was like, this essay doesn't come across as angry to me. It comes across as like a bit confrontational, a bit like, let's challenge this together, but I don't know. So I like her tone with that. I'm interested to see how that essay goes. And so yeah, the two topics. One topic is like the heterosexuality of feminism. The other topic is kind of like the implicit assumption that all the women who are engaging in women's studies are straight, which she wrote this in 1980 after teaching at university for like, I think at this point like 15 or 20 years. If you guys can read the description, I can't, but it tells you in the description, it says what year she started teaching at the university. Anyway, so that's kind of like the two discussions that are going on, and I think that they're kind of separate discussions. Like obviously they're not, but I think they can be they can be engaged in on their own merits separately, and then after that we can like draw that together. The other thing that I want to point out is that the word lesbian has like multiple definitions. So throughout the essay she uses lesbian capitalized and lesbian lowercase, and some of you are going to kind of be like, Benji, you're splitting hairs, but like I'm just trying to like engage with it like in the cultural context of its era. So, and I know that I'm biased because like I love Marilyn Frye. I'm not trying to be like pro political lesbian. So this is what I think is happening in this essay. Like I was thinking so much as I was reading it. So first of all, lesbian with a capital L, I think from reading this and from historical context, just means a woman who is woman-centered. There's a paragraph, a very long paragraph here, where she talks about like, if you recognize that you're eating unhealthy food, you make a conscious effort to stop eating that food, start eating healthy food, and spend your time around women who eat healthy food. So there are tons of women who I've met who are like, I don't have a television because all TV is like phallocratic, and so I will not consume it. I have books written by women. I read those books instead. So I think she uses the term women identified and women centered at one point in parentheses beside the term lesbian with a capital L. And I think that's a lot about what she means when she uses the term lesbian with a capital L. Then in other parts, she uses the term lesbian with lowercase l. She means, I think, like actual like women who have sex with women, who date women. So I think it's confusing and I don't like it. But like, let's keep in mind at the time that this was like an accepted thing that a bunch of authors did. They used lesbian interchangeably to mean both of those things. Lesbian, capital L, woman-centered, right? Lesbian, lowercase l, a woman who like has sex and engages. You can be a lesbian, capital L, at the same time as being a lesbian, lowercase l, right? You can be a lesbian, capital L. I think, reading between the lines in this essay, I think that you can be a lesbian, capital L, woman-centered, and just have like a woman-centered life, and that means like prioritizing women in an intentional way and not committing your sexual and like domestic labor to men. I think it's kind of at that time what we would now consider to be like a type of like political celibacy almost. Yeah, Kitty Cat says, I can't see how any feminist engaging in radical feminism don't come to the conclusion that engaging in heterosexuality is a good thing. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what I was saying before. I was like, she has two kind of discussions here. One is like, what are we teaching in women's studies? And one is like the question of this assumption of heterosexuality among feminists, women she considers to be feminists, or she says that they describe themselves as feminists. And she's kind of just challenging them and saying, like, one, if you ask yourself about that question, why aren't you asking yourself, and how do you like square the personal and the political with that? And two, how does that lead to what you're teaching in the academy and with the thoughts of the young women that you're influencing, right? So yeah, I think a lot of what she's saying in this essay, obviously she does get to the point where she's like, if you can change your eating habits, your thinking habits, and your media habits, you can change your desires over time. That I found interesting for a couple reasons. But mainly, I thought about it in terms of like in the, I think the last essay or the essay before that, she mentioned compulsory heterosexuality. In her last book, she mentions compulsory heterosexuality. She mentions like the coercive, concerted, powerful, inescapable grooming or seasoning are the words that she uses that women go through that force them into heterosexuality. So when I was reading that paragraph about how women can kind of like train themselves out of things that they view as like immutable and inescapable, like for example, consumerism is one of the things that she brings up. I was not thinking that she was saying you should all brainwash yourselves to be lesbians. I thought that what she was saying was, if you want to, you can unbrainwash yourself from coercive heterosexuality. Now, does that mean this is like the thing I was talking about the Angela Wilde essay? There's like three options, right? Heterosexuality, however you arrive at it, not being heterosexual, being a lesbian. They're three separate categories, okay? So what I read, what I heard, and what I understood when I was reading that was you can be heterosexual, you can unbrainwash yourself from being that heterosexual and be a uppercase lesbian, aka a woman-centered, woman-identified woman. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a lowercase lesbian, aka having sex with women. She obviously does go that far though, because she literally says like you can train yourself into like a new erotic desire. I don't agree with that. Like when I read that phrase, my thought was, if you're in the straight category and you unbrainwash yourself out of the straight category, you can then gain like a new self-understanding that might lead you to the lowercase lesbian category. That doesn't mean that you trained yourself to be a lesbian. It just means you gave yourself like the room to be a lesbian. That's how I would interpret that. That doesn't seem to be how she's interpreting that. However, in the postscript, in the 1992 postscript, I love the postscripts in these. It's really interesting for her to be like 12 years later, after talking to a bunch of women about it, this is what I think about what I wrote and why it doesn't make sense or something. Yeah, in the postscript, maybe I'm like oversimplifying, but she basically is like, I'm not trying to tell women they should all go off and choose to be lesbian lowercase. I'm telling women that they should like contemplate and analyze why they're so phallocentric and how they could, or if they want to be, more woman-centered. That's basically what I got out of the postscript. And then that's where she goes a bit into like the how to unsocialize yourself from heterosexuality a bit. And as always, I love using really easy to understand analogies. Okay, let's get a bit more into the nitty gritty now that I feel like I've kind of explained my major thoughts on the general gist of the essay. Something one of you was saying before in the live chat. What were you saying? Something about how like reasonable women were saying things that we now consider to be unreasonable or something like that. And I think a lot of it has to do with like think about the word gender, right? When we were reading femininity, the way that gender was used was not like a morally neutral term. At least not how I read it. Gender was used as like this is like a structured, enforced hierarchy. I don't see how you could read the book Femininity and come away with any other understanding of the word gender. You look at the way that gender is being used now, right? Same thing with the way that lesbian uppercase, lesbian lowercase is used in like these books that are like older. It's like, I don't think that they actually had super unreasonable stuff to say. I think that with our modern way of thinking, we look at it, and because of the way that we use language now and because of like the concepts that we consider to be like unquestionable, like even throughout this essay, one of the things that she kind of keeps coming back to is like, why are we assuming that women are naturally heterosexual? And it's like, well, if you do consider that all women fall into 3 categories, lesbian, bisexual, straight, then when you read this essay, you're going to think, well, she's just trying to switch you into a different category. But if you don't have that assumption coming into the essay, you will read the essay very differently. That's why I really try on this channel when we read stuff to, like, as far as my knowledge goes, which is not that far, to consider it on the basis of the way the language was used at the time and the ideas that were like prominent at the time. I feel like I know like 1% of what I need to know to really do that, but like, let's try, I guess. Kitty Cat says, I don't either. I haven't been in a heterosexual relationship for 10 years and about the same time centering women. Still haven't had an erotic orientation towards women. Yeah. Puzzle Person says, I really enjoy digging back into stuff like this and working out perspectives and how it makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Because like, even the women, we've read stuff on this channel, not for a long time, because honestly it makes me really angry to spend like, I've finally finished like downloading everything from now until 2022, like backwards onto my hard drive, and now I'm working like 2022 farther back, because I think I started the channel in 2019 or something. And it just pisses me off looking at the amount of books that I read, like Sophistries by Layla J. Roop, or parts of Eating Fire that I read, that I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I can't even disagree with them like on principle or on value or on logic, because it literally doesn't make sense. And I just spent 4 hours reading these 2 chapters. Like the amount of time I spent, I don't mind disagreeing with like the lesbian psychology's books. I would say like, was it like 30 to 50% of the essays I like completely disagreed with them or found their logic flawed, but I didn't mind reading those because I found their logic flawed in a way that I could like engage with and disagree with. It didn't just make no sense. They had a logic to it that I could interrogate. I don't like reading books that there's just, so this book, I don't agree with everything in it, like, but it has a logic to it that I can understand, and I can approach it from her perspective, and then I can approach it from my perspective, and we can see why we do or don't agree or how that works. That I find value to. I don't find value to disagreeing with women when their arguments are coherent. Yeah. Okay. So, actually, I think we're probably gone through most of what I had to say about the essay, but let's go through a little bit more specific stuff. So, at the very beginning, she talks about like the predominance and primacy of heterosexual perspectives, values, and commitments throughout women's studies. Obviously, for those of you who were around when we read Layla J. Roop, one of the biggest reasons that is because like what we have that's written down by women, first of all, is very small compared to what we have written down by men. And out of what's written down by women, what was written down by women who we could tell were lesbians or told us they were lesbians and that survived throughout history is like absolutely minuscule. So like just on a numbers perspective, you're kind of screwed to start with. But obviously, as a professor, she's like, we have, and she wrote this essay in the 1980s. She's like, we've got lesbian stuff in the last 10 years. Why isn't that in the academy, right? It draws me back to what I think was in essay 2 of this book, where she basically is like, the fact that I'm here is tokenizing lesbianism. Like the fact that I am a professor teaching in an institution of patriarchy is tokenism that lets them check off the box to pretend that they're like encouraging radical thought or whatever. when like they wouldn't let me be here if they really thought what I had to teach was that radical and would actually like upset the institution. So she's kind of right. So same thing here. It's like the fact that women's studies exists is meant to be radical, but within it, is it actually that radical if it's within an institution that is like enabling it? Probably not. And she says also like, well, I might teach stuff that I consider to be pretty radical, and the fact that I'm here as an out lesbian is pretty radical. But if the majority of the women in the faculty are teaching with this implicit assumption that all women are heterosexual and that all the knowledge they need is to navigate heterosexuality because they will inevitably be doing that, then what impact do I really have? She's like, I have one, but it's pretty small. Yeah. So when I was reading that, I immediately thought, and she mentions like this lesbian and gay studies. Well, now we have sexual diversity studies or gender and sexuality studies or whatever it's called at the department of whichever university is closest to you, right? Like, some universities, they don't have like women's studies and then sexual studies. They have like just gender, but some universities now they have like women and gender studies and like sexual diversity, or like they have like some of them have split it up and some of them put it together and it's all a mess. But at the end of the day, no matter which of those departments you're in, the term lesbian doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. And I have friends who've done their undergrads or masters in those fields, and they're like, we didn't read in a single essay or book or article or whatever that was by a woman that made it clear she was a homosexual or lesbian by whichever definition we've established so far in this essay. I mean, in this video about the essay. That it was clear that we read this that was by a lesbian for lesbians, or we read this that was by a lesbian about lesbians. Like, everything is like amorphous, right? Everything is like intangible. Like, it's like lesbians exist, we guess. We'll mention them sometimes, but nothing is really about lesbians. Nothing is really for lesbians. Nothing is really like, this is absolutely a lesbian specific thing, which is insane because when you talk to the women who've done study in those, when you talk to women who've done their studies in those fields, they're like, oh yeah, we had an entire class where like a quarter of their curriculum was specifically about like kink and written by people who like consider themselves like kink culture curators or insane shit. And it's like, so those people have their own clear identity, their own clear body of work, and their own clear culture within what you've studied. But lesbians don't have their own clear, discrete identity and their own clear, discrete culture and their own clear, discrete value in and of themselves because of their difference. Right? Like, it's crazy. Like, so I think nothing has really changed, which is why I kind of love reading these older books. Nothing has really changed. She's like, the implicit assumption. I'm going to get like kind of graphic here, but like whatever, it's my channel. The implicit assumption is that women are going to interact with dick. So everything we teach them takes that assumption into account, right? You look at modern university curriculum, you look at a lesbian who's in like the gender sexuality studies of a university, and the implicit assumption of everything that she's reading is that every single fucking woman is going to interact with dick. Like, literally. I have friends who are, they finish their degree or they're doing their like higher level stuff, and they will like send me the syllabus for like all the readings of the semester, or they'll send me the rubric of like all of the like external reference texts that there's or whatever. And it's like, you look through it and there's literally not a single fucking thing that you're like, oh, that's by a lesbian. And in that book or that essay or that short story, no, there is going to be no woman, or there's going to be at least one woman who never contemplates or completely discounts the possibility of having sex with a man. It just doesn't fucking exist. Like, it does not fucking exist. So Or I'm sure that there is some curriculum in some university where there is one implicitly lesbian text, one implicitly lesbian article, okay? But much how she is like, I'm radical and I'm here, but I'm so outnumbered by all these straight women that it doesn't really make a difference. Same thing. Imagine you did your entire undergrad, 4 years of school, and that you read one essay by one woman who said, I will never ever have any sexual interaction with a dick. And here's my story about whatever the fuck. And every other thing you've read that had women in it assumed that women all loved dick. Like a drop in the pond, you know? Like, anyway. So when I was reading the first page of this, the first page and a half, I was like thinking about friends of mine who are in the academy, and I was like, yeah. Oh, and then exact same thoughts I had, where she was like, for them, the concept of a lesbian is like a topic. It's a subject. It's a thing that we can like have a discussion about. For me, being a lesbian is my fucking life. And same thing with the academy. Like, I've even had discussions online or seen discussions, because I try not to talk to teenagers online, where someone would be like, I brought up, like, you know, based on the country I'm from, like something to do with sexism, something to do with misogyny. Like, I brought up, based on my personal experience, something to do with sexism or misogyny. And in my university class or in my high school class, kids like turned around and were like, stop saying TERF stuff. And it's like, so to you, the existence of misogyny is like a topic to discuss. But for me, the existence of misogyny is a real world experience. And it's alienating for me to hear you think it's like an intellectual, quite like an intellectual like game, when it's like my life. And same thing with lesbians. Like, you have lesbians in the academy who are engaging on a day-to-day basis in this like implicit lesbian hating. Like, it's like an intentional erasure of lesbians, like an intentional like infection that there are women who are into women, but they all love dick anyway. And there are lesbians in the academy who are consuming this every day and having to write essays about this every day. And it's like, what's supposed to be, like, she talks about this, I think 2 essays ago, where she talks about like diversity and like multiculturalism and like, you know, understanding stuff from other people's perspectives and like integrating stuff into like curriculums to make curriculum more diversified. She's like, it's supposed to be like taking a separate thing that has value in and of itself and adding it to stuff you already know. What it's actually become is like, this is all the stuff we already know, like plug it in there and have those base assumption values already assumed into it. And like, that's what it is, right? Patriarchy is the default, heterosexuality is the default, dick worship is the default. Okay, well, there's some lesbians, stuck that in there. Okay, so there's someone who are attracted to women, but they're still like dick worshipping heterosexuals just like the rest of us. Like, obviously I'm oversimplifying it, but like at the end of the day, that's really what it boils down to, at least the way I'm thinking of it. Yeah, Kitty Cat says, even if lesbianism is a topic now, it assumes that dick will still be involved. Completely agree. Yeah. Okay, let's move on from that. What time is it? Okay. So she talks about how she uses the terms here. Women's studies as an institution, as I know it, actively and aggressively supports women in becoming and remaining heterosexual. So if you have a radical feminist understanding of women's sexuality, not orientation, but behavior, women's sexual behavior within a society, you obviously understand that heterosexuality is an institution. It's not a natural instinct. It's an institution, right? And if you understand that it's an institution that harms women and keeps women under the thumb of men, she even goes so far in this essay as to say it's not only about like the collective power that men have over women, but the one-to-one power that men use to keep women subjugated through heterosexual relationships. Then to attempt to teach feminism under these conditions where you are actively and aggressively supporting heterosexuality seems antithetical. And I think that's kind of one of her biggest points in the essay. And I agree with that. Is that to say that we should encourage women to choose to be lesbians? No. What I'm saying is that I think, and I think that she thinks this also, but she obviously was way more complex in her explanation of it, is that we should teach women feminism in terms of, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do with your life. I don't know what your sexual behavior is. I don't know what your sexual history is. Like you who is watching, hi. But this is what's good for women. This is what works for women. This is what's bad for women. This is what doesn't work for women. This is what works really, really well for men and therefore fucks over women. Let's understand the concepts and understand the values associated with those and understand the politics, who has power and who doesn't have power and all of that associated with those things. Instead of just assuming you're going to go on to be a heterosexual, you're going to go on to worship dick. Like, that's more of me thinking about the modern, contemporary women's studies, gender studies curriculum, right? And you don't need to think about it. You don't need to analyze that. I am a women's studies teacher, and I'm telling you that I worship dick and you worship dick, and it's all fine. You don't need to think about it. Like, that to me is like what's... This kind of almost triggers me in a way because I remember being younger when I was still a TIFF and being interested in because back then I thought queer theory and feminism was all one category, right? And I was very interested in women's rights generally. Even though I didn't consider myself one, I still saw that there was a lot of problems that needed to be addressed. And I remember looking so hard, going to the biggest libraries in Toronto and looking up in reference texts what's going on, what are the books I need to read to learn about this, constantly searching for the truth of who knows what's going on, who can explain to me why it's happening the way it is, why am I seeing things that are upsetting to me and everybody is telling me it's fine when it's not fine. And I was being lied to, right? That's how I view it. I remember I read so many fucking books about sexuality as a teenager, and it wasn't until 18 that I learned what a clitoris was, that women had them and women were capable of orgasms. And I was like, this is not a fucking accident that I've been looking for this shit and reading about this shit for 3 or 4 years. And now here I am, and suddenly this intensely important information is suddenly here. It's not an accident that I didn't know this before now. Anyway, my point is I think of all of the women who went into women's studies in the 70s or the 80s. Did she write this essay in 1990 or 1980? 1980. Okay, so she's talking specifically about women who all went into women's studies in the 60s or 70s or whichever years university started having that department, who are thinking, I'm going here to interrogate, because I think they had a very different assumption about women's studies, women going into it. Even going into it at that time, I'm sure was seen as you're not going to be able to get a career out of this. You're not going to be able to take it seriously. People are going to suspect that you're problematic. I think it was a very different approach societally to women who studied women's studies then versus now. Now it's viewed almost like a psychology degree. It's oh, well, you're interested in humans, but it's not really a degree you can do anything with, right? I imagine all the young women who are I have questions, I have thoughts, I'm uncomfortable with things that I can't explain and I can't understand, and I'm going to go study women's studies, and I'm going to get a deeper understanding of this, and I'm going to interrogate things in a way that I've never been enabled or challenged to do before. And they go into the fucking women's studies department, and they're you worship dick, I worship dick, hooray for dick, no more questions, but let's encourage women to write more books or something, whatever it was that they were saying was the problem at the time. And it makes me angry, because at that point, you're not just sitting by and letting patriarchy control women. You are part of the fucking control of the women. Yeah. Anyway, okay. This also, now that I'm seeing this phrase, I want to kind of draw back to something I said, I think at 5 or 10 minutes in. She's I am notorious for my own in my town for my recruitment of women to lesbian, capital L, and lesbianism. Okay, like ellipses. Imagine a real reversal of heterosexual teaching. What? Anyway, my point is that she's using the capital L. So I think that what she's meaning is just like centering women in and of themselves, being woman identified, which means like having values that are by and for women, not values that you derive from patriarchy, like capital L. So she's like, I'm notorious for encouraging this. Do you think that she's entering her classes trying to tell women that you should go have sex with women? No. She's entering her classes telling women, I care about what's happening to the women. I care about why the woman did it. I care about why the woman thought that way. I don't care about the heterosexual implication, the heterosexual. Like, it seems, if you read Marilyn Frye's works, the only times that she brings up heterosexuality is to be critical of it and to analyze its negative impacts on women. And I think that's what she means when she says that she's like woman-centered, aka lesbian with a capital L. She's like, I'm not bringing up women as like the default appendage to men, which often is what happens when you accept heterosexuality as the status quo. Yeah. Marsha's bringing up Diana Artemis taking an oath to be a virgin. And that's kind of what this is about. Does it say it in the first essay? No, here's the acknowledgements. Is there an introduction? Yeah. Well, in the introduction, she basically brings up the term virgin, not in terms of not having sex with men, but in terms of like being autonomous, like almost as a synonym for women's autonomy and women's like self-governance. And how that's something that she's like, that's kind of the topic of the whole book in general. I think we're going to get more into it in the last section. Like, there's like a lesbian sex. I think that kind of is the foundation that is founded on the concept of like women's sexual autonomy, women's autonomy in general, which like extends to the sexual, like what is the definition of virgin, what is the definition of sex. And then the very last essay, willful virgin, or do you have to be a lesbian to be a feminist? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's go through now. I need to kind of get off the stream soon. No, turf. Obviously, turf males. Obviously, that's your right and everything like that. I just think that this is kind of what I was talking about before, where I'm like, we come into everything with the knowledge that we have now. So like the discourse right now is like words have meanings. Don't fuck with the meanings of words, which obviously is good and true and all that's great. But when we're so concrete about it, it makes it so that you can't read an essay and understand it from the perspective of the author. And I think that's not good, because that means that you are stuck in one way of thinking and you can't think from other perspectives. And I think that that is very harmful. Yeah. Which is how you get people like advocating completely for political lesbianism, because they read this essay, maybe, and instead of being like, oh, there's like distinctions here. Yeah, but instead of being like, oh, there's distinctions here and nuance here, they'll just read it as like, well, she thinks everyone should choose to be a lesbian, which I don't think is what she's saying at all. Can you be more explicit, Maple, what you mean by that? Okay. I'm going to go through these like questions that she's like, I wish that these women would ask themselves these questions. I wish that you would notice you are heterosexual. I wish you would grow to the understanding that you choose heterosexuality. So this is something that she talks about I think it's in the oppression. No, it's in the sexism essay of her first book, I think. She talks about how women are seasoned or groomed into heterosexuality, and how she takes like a real historical perspective of it, and a kind of like non-Western perspective of it. She's like, let's be so for real. Women didn't have rights to their own money. They didn't have a capacity to have their own independence. Everything they did was like under the power of a man. And so if men tell them like this is what they want and they punish them very easily for not doing what they want, women quickly come to the understanding that the path of least resistance to like have a roof over your head and be able to like, spend time with your children is to like give the men the sex they deserve, they demand, they are entitled to, right? That's how she describes heterosexuality, okay? So she truly thinks that it's like society is forcing it upon women. And if you do take that perspective, especially as historically informed, then you can truly understand how it's like only really in the last like less than 100 years that women have been able to like have their own businesses, have their bank accounts, have their own, be independent to the point where not everything you do is dependent on your sexual subservience to a man, right? So I wish you would grow to understand that you chose heterosexuality. So I think what she's saying is like you now have the capacity for independence. And when you choose to enter into a relationship with a man, which throughout all of her books, she's like constantly saying it's impossible to have a relationship with a man that doesn't have a power difference. And she's always like, I wish there was possible. I wish that after the feminist revolution, you guys could all do that, but we're not there yet. She says that over and over again. So she's like, we now live in an era where you can live a life without being around men who force you to be in a subservient role, but you've chosen to retain that role. She's like, let's just think about it. Yeah. Here's the other question she has for these straight women teaching in academia is like a whole paragraph, so prepare yourself. I wish you would stop and seriously consider, as a broad and long-term feminist political strategy, the conversion of women to a woman-identified and women-directed sexuality and eroticism. Okay, so this is what I mean. This is one of the parts where I definitely don't agree with her. I don't think it's necessary to have an erotic and sexual direction towards women to be feminist. I do think that to be woman-identified and woman-directed generally, or even specifically, is like necessary for feminism. Because as I say over and over and over again, the basis for feminism is the connection between women. So building connections between women, building feminism, yeah. I don't think that necessitates eroticism, but okay. As a way of breaking the grip of men on women's minds. Okay, but let's go out on a limb here and think it through more from perspective. I think that part of this is almost calling into question the willful virgin thing. And like maybe I'm misunderstanding it, or maybe I'm taking this in bad faith or something, but if you truly think that like, and this is what I got from her earlier works, which maybe was not her point, but like saying no is like the cornerstone of feminism. Women saying no. Women seeing a power structure or an institution that's meant to exploit them and use them, just being able to say no. Not no, but, not no, or, not no, maybe, no, right? When I see this concept of like a choice lesbianism, what I'm seeing is no, but. And I actually think that that's kind of conceding something. And I don't like that. Like, I think what she's saying here in this exact paragraph is being women-centered and women-directed and women-oriented is great. But to not be like sexually distracted or sexually tricked by men, you need to go a step further and be sexually directed towards women. I don't agree with that. I'm not trying to like say bad things about the author or anything, but I kind of think that implies like less self-control or less willpower on women. Like, I think women are strong enough. I don't know. Or maybe because I'm also trying to think about like the sexual politics of the time. If you read some of her other work, you know that she's against BDSM and she views it. She views a lot of, well, what did they call S&M? She views a lot of the S&M stuff as like women basically taking on men's culture, like gay men's sexual culture, which like I for sure agree with. But the idea that like women had their own sexual desires and their own sexual needs was definitely like an idea of the era. I don't know where she fell on that. Maybe the reason that she ended up at this position of it's not enough to say no to men, but to say yes to women is that it's like an act of like women's sexual agency, especially because you're doing it amongst each other. So the politics of it is complete. I don't fucking know. I'm just trying to like, okay, let's keep going. Right. Removing women from the chronic attachment to the primary situations of sexual and physical violence that is rained upon women by men, and as a way of promoting women's firm and reliable bonding against oppression. So this is, again, I'm just going to reiterate myself. You can firmly and reliably bond with each other without a sexual element. Like, I would even say, like, think about your lesbian friends, okay? Why is the camera doing this again? Think about your lesbian friends. Think about lesbians that you know, lesbians that you are, like, aware of in your social circles, even if you're not friends with them. How many of them are, like, settled down with one woman and are with that woman, like, reliably for a super, super long time? I don't think it's a lot of them. I think a lot of lesbians are, like, serial monogamists. How many lesbians do you know who have fellow women friends that they've been friends with for, like, 50 years or whatever? Like, all of them. Like, whenever I'm in a situation to be surrounded by older lesbians, there's always a few who are like, I've been with my partner for, like, 60 years or something. But the vast majority of them are like, this is my friend who I've been friends with since 1972. And I'm like, so your partners come and go and your friends don't. I do feel like this idea that the most reliable and deep and important bond that any woman can have requires a sexual element is actually taking on a patriarchal value. I think that that's a patriarchal idea that that women feminists in the past have tried to, like, not intentionally, but they've taken that assumption and involved it in their feminist analysis. Who wrote A Passion for Friends? We really need to read that on here. I haven't read it. I've read quotes from it. I have a couple of friends who say like A Passion for Friends is like the best feminist book they've ever read. And it's a book that's all about the connections between women and how that's what feminism is. And like that's what builds women up and keeps like feminism going and like power and blah blah blah. Yeah. I think it kind of undercuts the power and the significance of like female friendships that are non-sexual. All right. So those are the questions that she asks these women to ask. But basically she's like, have you considered that like everything you teach and everything you think comes from the position that you are heterosexual? And the other one, have you considered like the long-term broad and feminist strategy of being women-centered rather than male-centered? And she says in the postscript, like, she gave this to a bunch of women from her university, and that some of them got really defensive about it, just like fucking obviously, because she basically is trying to advocate a type of separatism, and women in general find separatism very threatening and anxiety-inducing, which is like understandable because it's like so radical. I like this paragraph a lot. I'm just going to read this paragraph. This is like 2 pages later. At this point, it might seem that I am demanding of heterosexual women their respect for my choice, but that I am unwilling to respect theirs. I think, though, that it is respectful of autonomy to genuinely inquire into the history and grounds of choices, and disrespectful or negligent of autonomy to let freedom masquerade as choice, or to let the declaration "is my choice" close off rather than open inquiry. Okay, there's something else that she mentions that she doesn't bring up here, but a friend of mine who's an academic sent me it's like a screenshot of an essay or something. And this guy was talking about autonomy. Some fuckwit was talking about autonomy. And he was like, I think that it's sexist of us to say that women are not exercising autonomy when they want to be subservient. He's like, some women have a natural inclination to be subservient. And when they choose to be subservient because they're following their natural inclinations, if we don't respect that, we are like preventing them from acting on their autonomy. And I was like, what the actual fuck have I just read? And I texted her and I was like, so conveniently, this woman's choice is like the one choice. Because the guy, I forget, he goes on to say some other bullshit. But the way I was reading it, I was like, it really does seem like the subservience he's describing is the kind of thing that you would do to like prevent getting hit, to prevent getting kicked out, to like prevent causing anger. Like, this to me seems like a woman behaving in a way that she has been programmed to behave in to keep herself safe. It's really convenient that like the one thing that she really wants to do is the only thing she doesn't really have a choice that she has to do. Pretty fucking convenient, isn't it? And then you just put the word autonomy on that for some fucking unknown reason because you're stupid and you're a man, right? So here, I just thought of that because I read that recently. Here, she's like, if a woman doesn't have a choice and she's doing that thing, isn't it incumbent upon us to question, why does she want to do that thing? Why does she think she want to do that thing? Why does she present that as a choice to other women when we all know it's not really a choice? And I'm totally fucking here for that. I think that like that is the basis for some of the most contentious feminist discussions that you can have. Like, you know, the institution of heterosexuality, the institution of motherhood, the necessity of femininity within our society. Like, these are things that women are saying, I'm doing it as a choice. Like, I choose. A lot of women don't frame heterosexuality as a choice, but they frame, I chose that man, right? Heterosexuality is bad. A lot of men are bad, but that man, that's the one I chose. That's good, right? Or like, you know, wearing high heels to the point that your tendons are like disfigured and you can't walk without heels. That's bad. But I just wear like XYZ feminine things that are not as harmful to me or the environment. So like it's my choice. And it's like I think it's like our responsibility to challenge these things that women do, not on a personal level of attacking, but on an intellectual level of, so you think this is autonomy? Let's talk about the power structures that have led you or any woman to do this. And where's the exercise of autonomy within that? I think that's basically what she's saying. She's like, let's challenge it. And I think that to challenge a woman, individual woman, or she never really challenges individual women. She's always asking like broader questions, but to challenge a decision or an act that women make as a collective, given the power structures that they have to act within, is I think actually like a huge show of respect to say, hey, you're struggling to navigate these politics, to make the best case scenario for yourself within this politic. I respect you and your decisions. I respect that you're thinking things through in like the most logical way that you can, given the knowledge that you have and the powers that you're dealing with. I want to give you different information and ask you different questions and consider things from different perspective because you're smart enough and you are powerful enough to maybe make different decisions or to keep the same decision and have a more informed analysis of why you're doing that. Like, I think it's an act of respect to do that. Which is one of my issues with queer theory. Because they, like, fucking don't respect anyone. They're just like, everything is autonomy. Don't ask any questions. And it's like, stop fucking underestimating women. Stop being so fucking condescending. It's disgusting. All right. Then the last paragraph before the postscript is basically like, lots of lesbians and lesbian feminists have written a lot of stuff. Why aren't you fucking teaching it in academia? It's not like you don't have the option. But again, you're just choosing not to. Very on board with that. And especially, like, she wrote this essay in 1980, right? Now here we are, literally 45 fucking years later. 44 years later. And there has been a lot more lesbian writings. Like, what year did Lesbian Nation come out? Like, I'm just trying to think of things that are like general lesbian culture that are not even like radical feminist. Like, there's so much like general lesbian culture that has been published since 1980 that it's like there's so much fucking stuff to choose from. Anyway, okay, the postscript. So she's like, basically, she's like, I'm happy this that did stimulate a bunch of discussions amongst women. Some of them were defensive, but some of them were not. Then she goes into this idea of like how to like unbrainwash yourself or like how to uncondition yourself. She talks a lot about consumerism, but I think as a metaphor for how you could, try to unbrainwash yourself out of heterosexuality. Oh, and then the very last thing that she says is it's in the postscript. There's in the second last paragraph, she's like, some of you might wonder, like, did the angry lesbian keep on being in a women's studies? Yes, she did. I still am today. I think even now she's listed as like a professor emeritus. Like, I think she's technically still listed as a faculty of her university. I can't remember. It's in the description. You click on the links yourself. Okay. And then she's like, some might think that a better place for me would be lesbian and gay studies. But then she's like, no, actually, because not only do we have to then struggle to center lesbians, as we already have to do women's studies, we have to then also struggle to center any woman, because lesbian and gay studies is very fucking male dominated, which is what became sexual diversity studies, which is like the penis worshipping fucking department of every university. I'm going to read the last paragraph. I'm going to give you some thoughts on it, then we're going to be done for today. Tension and anger between lesbian and non-lesbian feminists in the academy still exists and still surfaces from time to time. And very basic questions about sexuality and feminist politics are still utterly and painfully unresolved. My own most recent effort to come to grips with some of it is in Willful Virgin, or Do You Have to Be a Lesbian to Be a Feminist, in this anthology. So that's not like why I bought this book. I bought this book because when I met her, she was like, have you read the sequel? And I was like, no, I didn't fucking know there was this, like, what sequel? And I was like, yeah, okay, so here we are. But I'm very excited to read that because, as we've seen recently, I mean, like, it's like every year, like clockwork. They're like, oh, lesbian separatists, those meanies. Or they're like, oh, like, saying that heterosexuality is an institution that harms women. Like, you want us all to choose to be lesbians. Like, the discourse has gotten, like, so rhetorical, so dogmatic, so repetitive, so, like, knee-jerk, harmful that I don't like it. And I'm like, let's read this essay. Maybe we can have other thoughts about it. I'm not delusional. I don't think we're going to change the way the discourse online goes, but, like, we can talk about it. Also, oh yeah, that's what I was going to say, and I forgot. But then I see now in her references that it is. She's referencing her own essay from the last book. It's called Lesbian Feminism and the Gay Rights Movement, Another View of Male Supremacy, Another Separatism. She truly views, which makes complete fucking sense, male homosexuality is like the ultimate, like, I think she describes them as the priests of like a phallocratic orthodoxy, where she's like, in a society where penis is the most important thing, like the strongest and most hardcore devotees of that are obviously the men who have sex with other men. The men whose entire lives revolve around dick and who do not need women or don't want women involved in anything other than to mock us with drag, which I don't know if she says that, but it definitely fits perfectly into that essay. So when she's like, the gay studies department is really not the place for us, like, if you read that essay, it actually seems kind of inconceivable after reading that essay that any woman would be like, hey, let's go hang out with the guys and see if they want to help us with some feminism. Because, like, why the fuck would they? Like, the gay guys. Like, no. The only times in history when gay guys have helped out lesbians is when it actually was just to help themselves and they needed better PR. All right. So that's it for today. Tomorrow I'm going to do a live react to this TikToker. kind of going to be more of like a discussion about like what I call communal grooming. I don't know if there's like a standardized language for that, but I think it's a couple different types of grooming. This person was called a groomer and reported to the school that they work at. And I think it's like a good opener for a discussion. And also that this person seems to be a lesbian who is getting a lot of hate from a lot of different people. I don't like using the term hate because it's like so derivative at this point, but you know what I mean? I think it's an interesting discussion. But I've scheduled to do it after work. My work might drag on longer. So like if that happens, I'll put in the live chat like I won't be here because I'm working. So we'll see. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, then absolutely next Wednesday. All right.